The landscape of marriage is damn confusing. There's open marriages where both partners get to have relations with others. There's polyamory where you can be in multiple relationships, both romantic and sexual at the same time. And there are thruples, which we'll talk about later. And if you're confused, here's a map that can help you decide. Now, these modern arrangements may not be for you, but I'm sure that at some point you might have considered it or even fantasized about a different marriage structure. Now, I always thought that this world of polyamory would be full of sex parties and hot 20-something-year-olds frolicking around parties in a mansion in LA. But that's actually not it. In fact, it might be someone you see at the pickup line or someone you met at a conference who just friended you on LinkedIn. And here's the thing that fascinated me about the poly community. It takes a lot of effing guts to go down that route. You have to be damn secure about yourself. You have to be willing to buck one of society's longest held convention. And you need to have a ridiculous amount of trust and love for your partner. Now, these are pretty honorable and aspirational traits, which is why when my friend Suzi Sosa said that she wanted to advocate for these types of relationships, I wanted to have a longer conversation with her. Suzi, after all, is an accomplished and seasoned entrepreneur. She's a mother of 2 teenagers, which actually scared me because I was like, they can see this interview on YouTube. But Suzi is fair game, and we discuss what it means to have a sexually healthy society.
Now, I want to start with, can we start with definitions? Because there's open marriages, polyamory, swinging, thruples. I don't even know how to pronounce it.
Yep,
thruples,
yeah.
thruples. It's probably more things that I don't know. Can you help us just frame the language so that we're talking about the same thing?
Yeah, well, I think I shared with you a link to that kind of poly map that maybe we can put also in the show notes, because it really shows how broad this world can be. Like in that map, you'll see, there are some categories of things like, well, we're open when we're traveling, or it's okay if my partner is open when they're on business travel, or we're open when we're, drinking, we're not open. So there's a lot of different layers to this, but I think generally, and let me start with a disclaimer that I don't consider myself like a professional expert in this topic. I have everything I know through my own journey, study, experience, and so forth. But I think generally, when people are talking about open relationships, they're talking about you consent to one or both partners having some kind of either romantic or sexual relationship with other people, right? And there's language like emotional monogamy and sexual monogamy. So you might have an emotionally monogamous relationship but sexually non-monogamous, or you might have a sexually monogamous relationship and an emotionally non-monogamous relationship. There's a lot of different variables there.
Got it. And so the concept of open relationships kind of spans all those different permutations.
Yep. I think the most common one that people think about is like, I have multiple husbands, wives, boyfriends, girlfriends. But that's actually, from my perspective, like a pretty advanced state of open relationship. That is very difficult to do well. And there are a lot of other, like, let's call them easier versions of that. Like one night, that you might be in a couple and you might invite a third person to join you for a one night stand, or from time to time when you go to a bar, you pick up a third person and you just have like a threesome. Or in the middle there would be kind of like swinging, where you're having sex with other people, but you're still doing it as a couple, versus like having a whole secondary fully fledged relationship with another person.
Got it. So like the training wheels would be, we enter this, we bring in a third party as a couple. That way, is it like a jealousy neutralizing mechanism of sorts?
I think so. In my experience, like the terrain where jealousy thrives is in the unknown, right? It's in your imagination. And when you're in the realm of the known and you can actually see what's happening, a lot of times you're not going to get as jealous about things as you would in your imagination. So yeah, being there together as a couple where everybody knows what's going on, everyone's consented, everyone's participating, tends to be emotionally easier to handle than like if your partner's dating another person, alongside you.
Got it. And polyamory would fall into like
that latter category.
The latter category. It's like multiple boyfriends or girlfriends.
Yes.
Got it. And thank you for that already. I'm like, the map has been clarified. So how do you, maybe if you could give a few, like our listeners, just a brief background on your current relationship status. And then the follow-up to that would be, how did you get into, how did you find this world?
So right now I'm in a committed partnership, not married. We've been together for about 5 years. We've both been married before. We bought a house together. We're raising my kids together. So it's pretty much as committed as you would be in marriage without the legal documents. We do have an open relationship that's more like swinging style open relationship than polyamory. So we would engage in things like that together. We don't have other partners that we're dating concurrently. And I would say the way we've structured it right now is that we want to have some degree of emotional monogamy between us, where kind of, you did this attachment podcast, but like the primary attachment is between the two of us, right? And if we have other people involved, it's really just sexual. It's not emotional. Like we're not texting those folks, afterwards or on the side, kind of thing like that.
As I was researching this, there was some episode about house hunting where a throuple was trying to buy a house, like to get all three of them. So not that level of that would be some level of emotional. And how did you, like, can you tell us about your journey in, I mean, admittedly, this is atypical. I mean, this is you're probably the only one of maybe 3 people who I consider a friend, I've ever even had the conversation about this with. So it feels fringe in some regards that like very few people talk about it. Obviously, we'll talk about the stigmas of it. Yet at the same time, it also feels like it's just becoming a bigger, I mean, no one ever talked about polyamory in my mind until 7 years ago, right? And then it was like on Twitter feeds and in blog posts and in Succession and, things like that. So
and I think we exchanged the link to like a New Yorker or Atlantic article about, is our open relationships like the new, fad of the bourgeoisie. So it's trending now. I guess, like, I feel like I sort of slid into it when I was married. I was married for a decade. I had these like recurring feelings of like wishing that I lived separately from my husband, and I would bring it up and he was like, "What are you talking about? That's crazy." And so I was really shut down. Like I knew I had a desire for something to be different than, cohabitating monogamous relationship, but there was no room there to explore that or really even talk about it. And as soon as I got separated, the first book I think I had my hands on was called Sex at Dawn. And it's a very interesting kind of anthropological and sociological look at the history of sex. And they talk a lot in there about the fact that a lot of the anthropological data suggests that humans were non-monogamous, in the pre-agricultural time, and that there's a lot of ongoing like tendencies towards non-monogamy. Then I think I read Mating in Captivity by Esther Perel, who also talks about that in her book. And so the first relationship that I got into after my marriage was with a polyamorous man who was married in a, at that point, probably a 25-year, maybe even a 30-year, what they call a polycule, which is like you're a stable poly group. So he and his wife both had multiple partners and had for a long time. So like his wife had another husband who had another wife who had another husband. Yeah, and there was a whole chain of them. And the man that I started seeing, he wasn't seeing anyone else at the time. But, since they had been doing it for 30 years, that was a really great, like, first experience. They really knew how to talk about it. They had, like, the rhythms of their relationship. So, she would go with her other husband on, I don't remember exactly, but it was like Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays she was with him, and she would alternate who she took vacations with. Sometimes, in the past, they would all go on vacation together, so all the pairs could be together. So yeah, it was a very like stable and structured kind of relationship, but it was still very confronting for me. I definitely had breakdowns where that old conditioning in my mind, and I was like, how can you love both of us? Why don't you just love me? So it wasn't all easy, even though I was willingly participating in it.
And did you seek that out, or just like you met this person and then it just happened that there was this polycule? What did you call it?
I mean, I knew
a polycule.
Yeah, polycule. Yeah. I knew he was married when we got together. So I knowingly walked into that. I can't say that I sought it out because I wasn't like on a dating app. There are now apps for people who are seeking, open connections. So it was more, I don't know, the universe delivered it to me. But yeah, and then I just kind of went on a journey of like trying different things. That relationship ended, and then I tried like building my own poly. I decided that the optimum number for me was to have 3 partners. Okay. And so that was very intentionally like created by me. Like, okay, I'm going to look for 3 partners, and I'm going to tell everyone that I go out with that I'm looking for 3 partners. I'm wanting to build this, stable structure. And so I was dating, a man who was in an open marriage, and then another man who was poly, wasn't married, but was poly. So, I had partners that also had other partners. And that was some of the stability, is that when you were not together, the other person is with their other people, right?
Yeah. You're making me realize that there needs to be some complex Notion document just to keep track of like whose day is what.
Yeah.
Wow. And so you set that up. What motivated you, or what led you to like from the kind of stumbling into a poly relationship to more proactively? What was the thought process to like?
I really liked the ability to have partners that activated different aspects of my personality, right? So like I had a partner that was very artistic and intellectual, and, we would, look at art together and talk about philosophy. And then I had another partner that was, more just like athletic and into nature. And so that was really amazing. And you have different, kind of power dynamics with each person. Like one person might be a little bit more dominant, so I'm a little more submissive. And so it was cool. Like I felt that, all the aspects of me were really being nourished and fed. Whereas, in a monogamous relationship, there's always parts of you that are just not going to connect with your primary partner, right? And you may fulfill that with friends, or you may just not fulfill that at all. So yeah. Wow. And even sexually, like there's different kinds of sex, right? Like you may want to have a partner where you have a little bit more what I would call like energetic sex, where it's like more, it's deeper, it's slower, it's more like a tantra style sex. And then you may want to have another partner that you know, it's more athletic kind of sex, and it's like quickies, and it's, you know, more physical. And then you might have a partner where, okay, now this is my partner where I do kinky things, right? And they are into kink too. And for most of us in a monogamous relationship, you can't go across that whole spectrum. Your partner has like one or two styles, or you have one or two styles. So that was part of the attraction of it, was just being able to feel like all these different aspects of me were really, you know, fulfilled.
And were those, if you're comfortable sharing, were they, you implied they were sexual, were they emotional? Oh, I forget what they were. They were all emotional as well, like emotional and sexual.
Yep.
And how long did that last, or is that still in effect?
It is not in effect. And, you know, things sort of ran their course with a couple of the partners. And then I met someone that like I wanted to have a little bit more, like a deeper single relationship with. And then we started swinging. So that was something that we'd start talking about. Oh yeah, that would be fun. And I had not really ever done that before. And so that was like the next chapter in the journey, was going into this swinger community. And so that's like couples dating couples is kind of the vibe in the swinger community.
Okay. It's not a third. It's like another. Oh, okay.
There are
you learn something new every day.
But the primary mode in swinging is couples dating couples.
Got it.
But there are a plethora of single men who offer themselves for couples if you want one. There's lines around the block of single men. There are a select number of single women that are known as unicorns. Because they're so rare. And the way that works is, you know, you would connect online with an interested couple, and then you would like meet for coffee or meet for dinner and see if there's four-way chemistry and interest. And then, you know, you kind of arrange to meet up like as two couples usually.
Got it. And is that in swinging, is the pretense sexual and emotional, or is it, my hunch would be it's more sexual, less emotional, but is that?
That's right. I think there are couples that, you know, say we'd love to meet long-term, another couple that we can connect with long-term. You know, you could see each other semi-regularly, maybe travel together, you know, build a little bit more of a relationship, but it's pretty rare to do that. A lot of the swinging world is just sex.
Got it. And is it more like one night standy or more recurring?
I would say like in the community in general, it's pretty one night standy. And the side of swinging that I don't like is it can feel a little transactional. Like, you know, people like, even I live in Austin, and in a city like Austin, you can sort of make your way through all the couples. Like, oh yeah, I've been with them, and have you been with those guys? And you know, it has a little bit of that vibe. But I now, and you know, at this stage, I'm more interested in like, people where there is good chemistry, and you might meet, you know, every quarter or twice a year. You know, everybody's got like kids and work and stuff, so there's a lot of logistics to move around. But I think. I feel like I'm in the minority. I'm always like, I want to be friends with benefits, you know, as couples. And a surprising number of couples are like, oh, I don't know if we want to do that. So I think most people want it to just be just sex.
Got it. And is it on, I mean, this is probably a personalized question, but is does the level of do you have to match attraction across like all four units, or like how does what if like three people are really hot and one's busted? Like, does that break, or does like three take over one? Like, how does that even?
This is something you'll see in the swinger world. There's a name for it. It's like the escalator or something like that. The swinging escalator, where you start as swinging as a couple, meeting other couples, and then you realize that it's nearly impossible to get like chemistry across both pairs or chemistry across four ways. And so, as one of my friends said to me, he said, yeah, it felt like no matter what, someone was taking one for the team. And so what happens is a lot of swinging couples eventually will evolve to a place where they'll call it playing alone. So that means you can go off on your own, either with another couple or with a single. But unlike polyamory, it's still very like more focused on just sex versus like having another primary type partner, right? It doesn't have like as much of a dating feel. They're very close, they're like right there on the spectrum. Like swingers who play alone and people who have polyamorous relationships it's close. But I think swingers who play alone would probably describe it more like, I just hop into sexual experiences, but I don't bring my husband or wife, and then I hop out again. I'm not trying to like date someone.
Got it. I remember one of our guests, Natasha Miller, she said that like swingers in general were older than you would think. So like I think of swingers and I think of, Clockwork Orange or, like a bunch of like 24-year-old hot models, in LA doing coke. And, but, you've talked about the logistics of kids. You have kids. Is there a way to kind of like the average person is this age or they've been married this long or like is there some kind of like archetype?
I'm sure and like a reporter or a academic has done a proper study on this, but I would say anecdotally swingers are probably 35 to 45, most of them, like in Austin anyway. There is like an older generation, so kind of like the 60 to 70 age range, that are out and about for sure. But where, like on the apps where we are, it's a lot of couples who have been married for about a decade. They usually have, middle school age kids, and someone kind of raised their hand and said, like, could we spice this up a little? Like we've hit a plateau. There's a lot of stability. They're just driving the minivan and raising kids and wanting to have like a little bit of fun. I've noticed that it seems like a pretty fair number of couples get into it because the woman is bi and she wants to have sexual experiences with other women. And so that's also a pretty easy entry point, is to bring in a third woman, especially if the woman is bi, because then everyone's getting their needs met, right? Like the guy is like, great, 2 women. The wife is like, great, another woman. So I see that a lot.
But that's finding a unicorn, as you said.
or a married woman who will play alone.
Oh, who's up. Okay, got it. What's the term for that swinger where the one person plays alone? Is there a term?
They just say like we either play together or we'll play alone. Yeah.
Got it. I want to talk about like the social and stigma, but is there ever like you see someone on the app and then you're like at pickup at school or you're at in Whole Foods and you're like, this person swiped down on me, or you see the couple like that? I feel like that would freak me out. Just like, and we'll talk about the stigma part of it.
So another
you're
thing,
like coaching your kid's soccer game, and like you were the
totally. So Steve and I also like to go to sex parties in Austin. So I was at a conference here a month ago, and for like business leaders, and I look over and I was like, that guy was at the Christmas sex party. I had seen him in leather shorts and a leash, and now he was at the business conference. So there is a bit of that. And we run into other people that we know. So, you just, I think there's definitely a sense of like mutual confidentiality, because there are some environments where it would still be risky to be open about this. But yeah, I think it's funny. I think it's like a wink, wink. Like, I saw you at Kinky Christmas.
Yeah. Wow. So would you say that, because I'm going to venture to guess that the majority of the listeners that are in, you basically, when you said the demographic of swingers, you also said simultaneously the demographic of people listening to this podcast. like 10 years married, you know, middle school age kids, kind of like, okay, you know, we've been monogamous for, you know, you've probably known your partner for 5-7 years before
married.
You got married. So you've been monogamous with one person for 17 years, right? Like that would be me. And so my question is, do you think a lot of the premise of it, if you could distill it, is this like belief that you had alluded to or mentioned that human beings are not meant to be monogamous? Is that like a central part of all of open relationships? Or
well, what are you asking? Are you asking if I believe that? Like, what's the real question there?
I mean, the question is monogamy, I guess, I mean, do you believe or does, I guess, I don't know who the expert on this would be, that like we are not meant to be monogamous, that like human beings are not meant to be monogamous, so open relationships are the byproduct of that belief, of that
so it's funny because, you know, I started all of this journey a decade ago, around 2013. I'm 46 right now, and I believe today that human beings can be very happily monogamous, but I think it's something you choose, right? It's kind of like, I mean, this may be a weird analogy, but like, it's kind of like what you choose to eat or not eat. I don't get to eat everything I want to eat because there's something bigger that's more important to me, which is my health, right? And my longevity. And so I think you can very consciously and lovingly and wholly choose to be monogamous. But I do think like there is a lot of wiring in us to, you know, the truth is you're attracted to multiple people. It's just a truth, right? And what you do with that information and like where you let that go is your choice. But our biology, like, wouldn't it be cool if you could just like flip a switch and never be attracted to anyone other than your married partner? And like, wow, that would make a lot of things easier, but that's not the case.
It's funny because Lisa and I have like talked about this in very speculative terms, and I think that one thing that I think there is, we both have this belief that like we're not wired to be monogamous, but it's kind of what do you choose to quote unquote suppress in favor of the greater good? And what do you choose to suppress? And I think that's like this is what fascinates me about the question, because to some extent it's like, how well do you understand yourself? How well do you fight back against cultural conditioning? And then how do you do that at a joint level? With like the extra stakes being like, you're talking about some like primal human shit, right? Which like, for better, for worse, can be like unhinged or like totally amazing, right?
So you are right now pointing at my single favorite thing about the open relationship community is the level of communication is off the charts compared to monogamous couples. The level of self-awareness, the level of emotional intelligence. That's not to say that there aren't examples of like horrible, but when you see the people who are doing this really well, their couple dynamic is so much more vibrant and deeper and healthier than the majority of monogamous couples that don't have these conversations. And I remember I was at a swingers party in Austin. It was a hotel takeover. So they had like multiple floors and all these, and so every room was like a different theme, and there's all these couples, you know, walking back and forth. And at the back end of the floor, they had like the refreshment room, and you could go in there and get snacks and drinks and hang out. And there were just couples just sitting in there having this conversation, and it was like such a cool energy of them together, them with others. Like I had this moment of like, oh, yeah, this is about sex, but there's something else going on here in the maturity and like the evolutionary place that they've taken their relationship. Like they, like they say, like the only way to get through your fear, you have to go like through your fear, right? And I think most monogamous couples are like, nope, we are not opening this box. We are not talking about this. I am just going to shove it all down.
Yeah.
And they're stuck. They're like stunted. Whereas to me, like to go through the conversation and then to choose to be monogamous because that's what works for you or that's what you need is a totally different thing because you've actually had all those conversations, right?
Yeah. I think we didn't plan this, listeners, but it is kind of like the exam in life. It's like to be able to successfully do this, you have to deeply like understand the role your ego plays. You have to deeply understand the role of your insecurities. You have to be willing to push against, cultural narratives. You have to take risk, right? Like there's a plethora of risk, which we'll discuss. And so like it is, I've read and researched this topic so many times, in part because like I'm genuinely curious of like if it's something Lisa and I would ever do, but just as equal with an equal fascination that like, God, like you like, because there's like the cynic's view is like these people are just blowing up their relationships and letting their sexual organs dictate their decision making.
Right.
And then the optimists or version of it is like, these are some of the most self-aware, confident, thoughtful people that are not going to be shackled by some like, Judeo-Christian like perception of morality. Right.
Right. I think it's an opportunity, right? It depends how you relate to it and what you do with it. It's an opportunity for very deep self-growth and growth as a couple. And I can share a little bit of like my journey with Steve. So when I met Steve on our second date, I was like, hey, by the way, there's something you need to know. I'm a swinger. And if you want to date me, we're going to be swinging. And he had come out of a 20-year monogamous marriage. And he was a bit like, okay, and
like,
he told me, well, I think there was like equal parts fear and cool. And so we met in 2019 and COVID, we were in our kind of own honeymoon phase and then COVID hit and nobody was swinging and that wasn't happening. So years went by and he kind of kept saying like, hey, when are we going to do that swinging thing? Meanwhile, we were falling into like very deep love together. Like it's the most secure and committed relationship I've ever had. And so we finally decide to turn on this swinging thing and start doing it. And I start having all of these body reactions that I'd never had before, just fear and like sinking stomach and like, what is going on? And I'm thinking, I used to love this. And now like, I feel like I want to throw up. What is going on? And so I really took that as like, oh, something changed in me. There's something to grow in here. And so I brought in a friend of mine who's a relationship coach and specializes in open relationships. And I was like, Amanda, you got to help me unpack what's going on. And so, of course, I start seeing things like, wow, in this relationship, I had over the years let myself become so much more vulnerable than I had ever been in any prior relationship. And so now the stakes are completely different, with this partner. And I had a lot of like my anxious attachment and my fears like really getting activated because I had so invested in this thing. And then I also saw that we had over the years, because I'm like kind of the day-to-day ops leader in our household, I get everything organized and I pay the bills and I cook dinner and that we had set up a dynamic where like, I was kind of in control all the time and Steve was basically, kind of a willing partner to that, but that wasn't working in the bedroom. And so we had to completely like flip it upside down. And the only way I could get comfortable with us in a multi-partner situation was if he was taking the lead and like like helping me be safe, and feel vulnerable. And so that completely changed the entire caregiving power dynamics in our whole relationship.
Wow.
It opened up all these conversations about, my need for more care that I wasn't even attuned to, because I was always in go mode. Like I'm the mom, I'm the CEO, I'm organized, I'm the older sister, da 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 da. And then through this sexual arena and some of the breakdowns we were having, I realized like I can't, like that's not helping us. And so now like our relationship has evolved like in incredible ways, through that, because we went out, we ventured out, we took a risk, we tried this thing. And I don't think we ever would have come across some of these areas for growth if we had just stayed, doing what we were doing before.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. I think of, it's almost like, you need to grow and evolve as a person. You need some kind of challenge or change of baseline states. And again, not like seeking challenge just for the sake of challenge, but like a challenge that's kind of more organic or more that kind of you stumble into. I think about that with like grief, where, grief is like one of these things, like losing a parent, where you just your whole world is shattered, especially if it happens quickly. And then you turn to your spouse and you need to show up for each other in like almost like completely different ways, kind of overnight.
Yeah.
Right. And some people thrive on that, and some people hate it because, the humming along, just broke the 15-year pattern of humming along. And so I could kind of like see some version of this as a catalyst of sorts.
Yeah, like another arena where that has come up for both of us is around aging. So we got into this community in Austin where they have like kind of regular sex parties, and the community is a lot younger than us. So we're in the, it's probably more like a 25 to 45-year-old community. And so we show up there, and most of the parties are like, 60 to 70% women. And so I would walk in and I would like suddenly feel like really insecure and closed and kind of like, I don't feel good. And what I realized through the conversation with Amanda is that I was just feeling like really insecure about being older, right? Like my 46-year-old body, no matter how much CrossFit I do, it doesn't look like my 25-year-old body. Yeah. And even just my sense of like careless or like carefreeness is different, right? I've got the gravitas of like my life lived. And so I'm in the room of all these, I like to lovingly call them the nymphs, right? I've got this room full of nymphs running around. And Steve, who's also going through his own journey as a, 51-year-old man, is like, oh, look at all the nymphs. And, when we talk about it and I'm like, hey, I feel really triggered in that environment. And here's what's going on for me. And what's going on for him is he's like, I just really want to feel attractive again. He's like, I'm balding, I'm graying, I'm over 50. And when the nymphs pay attention to me, it makes me feel sexy again. And we've been able to have a lot of like compassion for each other, both growing through the journey of aging, right? And like and seeing like, how these deeper things that we're all kind of wrangling with show up, and the sexual arena surfaces some of them.
Yeah. Wow. So good. Let's talk about this stigma, because I mean, you've laid all the benefits out quite succinctly. I mean, I will say that I told you this before we interviewed. I was like, I feel uncomfortable asking you these questions, not because of the conversation that we're going to have, but because this conversation is going to be on YouTube and your name's going to be attached to it, and you're a CEO and you fundraise and you have teenage kids and you probably volunteer at your school, and like, RadReads it's not huge, but it has reached, like, we have overlapping circles. So someone's going to hear you. Clearly you're not afraid of that stigma, but has the stigma ever backfire by being so transparent? Has it ever hurt you or caused you some kind of distress?
Not that I know of. And, where I started at the very top of the conversation was, I think of myself as a social entrepreneur. And I just read a piece about like the loneliness epidemic, right? So I really do believe that people finding greater intimacy and connection in their relationships is a social justice or like a social issue. And so I guess I kind of view this like I am taking the risk of, being misunderstood or mislabeled or whatever because I want this conversation to be out there more. One of a project that I wanted to do at one point, and I didn't finish it was, the show on NPR where the people interview each other. StoryCorps. StoryCorps
okay.
is what it's called.
I've heard of it, but I don't know it.
It's super cool. So in StoryCorps, there's a format where two people interview each other, and often they're like a mother and a daughter, or two old neighbors, or there's different kinds of relationships that StoryCorps will feature, and there's super beautiful, intimate conversations. And I said, I want to build this for couples around their sex and intimacy, because I feel like because this is a taboo topic, there's no role models. No one knows what anyone else is dealing with. And everybody feels so alone. I just see it in our friend group, right? Steve is there with his buddies, like telling them all the stuff we're up to. And his buddies are like, help me, how do I get something? And so I really do wish that like that vision I had for that project was just to record couples who are more advanced in communicating about their sex life, to talk like we are now, like, how did you get started? And do you tell your kids and what works and what didn't work? So that might be a place where you and your wife could sit and listen to some of these and then be like, what do you think about that? Or that's an issue. I've been feeling that way too. Or just kind of giving some prompts and, normalizing it. So, the long answer to your question is like, maybe there has been some backlash that I don't know. Maybe there will be some backlash. But to me, like what's at stake is a, profound sense of loneliness and disconnection in our society. And I really do believe that like sex and intimacy is a big part of healing that.
That's beautifully said. And I would suspect, again, just anecdotal kind of talking to peers and such, but I would suspect that the collective sexual health of this country is probably pretty poor.
I think so.
Again, I don't know how you would even measure that.
But I know. We also know there's like this kind of porn.
Oh, yeah.
Are we going to call it an epidemic? I don't know what the term is, but, there's a woman, she started this website called Make Love Not Porn, and she's kind of on a mission to like teach young boys, what's fake about porn, not all women like to have men ejaculate on their face, like it's like stuff like that, and so I do think that that to me, the porn, it's not, I don't think anything's wrong with porn, but it's like the whole ecosystem and behaviors that are like in orbit around porn, to me, reflect something a little bit unhealthy or out of balance, kind of like we would say obesity in our country is reflecting that we don't have a healthy dynamic going on around food and nutrition. And there's a lot of layers to it. And so, I think that our society, like there's many layers of what's going on with sex and intimacy and relationship. We also know people aren't getting married. Women aren't getting married. The divorce rate is higher than ever. Like there's all these, exactly. Like all the symptoms kind of seem to point to like, this isn't working. What we've been doing isn't working.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you, when we had Natasha Miller on, she was saying that a lot of 18-year-old boys are taking Viagra because you know, all of their sexual experience, they've watched so much porn, so there's no kind of regulation. On top of that, just like a fear of intimacy, and then an unrealistic standard of what sexual performance looks like in porn is driving 18-year-olds to take Viagra for their, you know, their first sexual encounter, which is like, it's almost like, I mean, the like big food is kind of, I'm curious, does that, I could see a lot of that on the side of men and young boys. I mean, obviously...
what's going on with women is...
as it relates to porn.
Sexual numbness. That's the epidemic in women, I think, right now. I talk to so many women who are like, I don't come, I don't have orgasms, I don't know how to have orgasms, I've stopped having orgasms. Like, I think that there's like... and that has a lot of layers. It has an emotional layer, right? Like not being able to get from your head into your body is like, because our world is so cerebral right now. Like everything is like in your head. Yeah. And then just all of the layers of body image and, you know, intimacy and but I think the symptom there is like this numbness and checking out of relationships, especially like in the married women. Most of the married couples that we know, the man wishes they were having more sex and the woman is like, stop pestering me about sex. And
that's literally every one of my guy friends.
And I think that's really mischaracterized. Like the big lie is that women don't have the libido. I think that's total bullshit. I think it's that we've got all these, you know, multiple factors feeding in, having women in this place where the end result is the sensation of numbness. A woman I know in Austin who is incredible, she does this thing called yoni massage. Have you heard of this?
I haven't.
No. So your yoni is, you know, your female sexual organs, and the lingam is the male sexual organs. And in the Eastern traditions, they have a kind of sacred sexuality practice of yoni massage and lingam massage. And it's really designed to like release energy blockages. And so my friend who does yoni massage, and she has a beautiful podcast where she goes in detail about what a yoni massage is. She talks about how women are like, they're numb in their bodies. You know, she's doing this
like actually numb.
Like they
numb.
can't feel anything when she's like touching them in different places. And so her work that she does is helping women release all the things that are causing the numbness. And it's obviously a combination of physical and psychological components to release it. But like, yes, it's all tight in there. Like women have lost their connection to their ability to have pleasure. So of course you're not really gonna be super excited about sex if your experience of it is mostly like numb, you know?
And that numbness is, like you said, it's like a lot of the body issues is like stress, like things like that. We started this with porn, but that's kind of like, there's a bit of a line between that.
Yeah, I think they're different. I think like how, like what's going on for men is different than I don't think porn is causing women to be numb. I think women are dealing with their own, you know, like their modern, you know, compilation of issues around work and motherhood and responsibility and, you know, anxiety and overwhelm and burnout and body image. And all of that kind of stacks up and leads to numbness.
Yeah. So the question that I've been wanting to ask for a while is like, how old are your kids and what do they know? Like, what if this shows up in their YouTube feed and like, Mom?
No, my kids are 12 and 14.
Okay.
And I have always been like a kind of what I would call a sex positive parent. So I'm not like everything's in the open parent because it's not age appropriate, right? Okay. So as they've gotten older, I'm more open about different things. But we have not explicitly said to them, oh, you know, we swing with other couples. And my kids are 50-50. with us. So we have weeks when they're at my ex-husband's house. And so that it makes it easier for us to, have other couples over or do things and they're not here. But I think they know, they'll chatter things like, I picked up your phone and I opened your browser. And I'm like, oh, or Mom, we know what's in your bedside drawer. And I'm like, okay, good. Let me know if you have any questions.
Got it. So if they stumbled upon this podcast, it's not like it would like rock their world.
No, my kids know. And I have books about sex and we talk about sex and my kids
Have you always done that? Like with your kids?
I mean, not always, like when it was age appropriate.
No, the age appropriate side of it.
Yeah, I have. I think, again, like you can see, I really do believe that sexuality is like a fundamental component of what it means to be a fully self-expressed human. And when you don't, like, it's so sad that we live in a time when people don't have the means to like flourish in their sexuality. I went to a conference, the Summit series. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I remember,
Esther Perel was speaking there, and so it was a live session, and she had the way she formatted it, there was a circle of chairs where she had all the men sit facing out. And then she had a circle of chairs around that facing in with all the women and a few of us, scattered in around the periphery. And so every pair of chairs was a man looking at a woman. And she went around with her microphone and asked the men to say to the woman across from you something you've been wanting to say to women, but, never felt you could. And vice versa to the women. And when she went around to the women, every single one was about some kind of trauma that had been enacted on the women, right? Being the victim of some kind of unwanted sexual experience.
Every single one.
So like when that's the backdrop, how are we going to have a sexually healthy society? And to me, like the unhealthy sexual dynamic between mostly men and women is, like as a parent, I have to prepare both my son and my daughter to not have that happen either by them or to them, right? And to hopefully have like fertile soil for a really positive and empowering sexual development.
Yeah. Beautiful. So last question, if someone's listening to this and they're like, I'm intrigued, you've sold me on the ecosystem, you've showed me that the risks, I think a big thing for me is like the risks. It's almost like, it's not necessarily like the risks of inaction or like when I left Wall Street, people are like, that's so risky. And I'm like, no, the riskier thing is to just go through the motions in life for a paycheck. Right. And so I think I see like kind of like risk and like two people can see the same risk in very different ways. And so I think the risk, and the reward as well. And so what, to this demographic that is like, minivan driving, middle school parenting, type A, achievement-oriented professional that used to think that swinging was, for like slutty cokeheads or something, and hunky models or whatever. What is like the you've mentioned apps, you've mentioned couples, open relationships, counselors, you've mentioned, I guess the traditional couple on couple swinging as being the, first base of things.
Well, I think as you just said, like there's risks in both directions. So there's definitely risks in trying any of this. The main one being that you're going to have some conversations that you're probably going to make both of you feel uncomfortable. Yeah. So you're going to have to grow. Like, even just for most couples, even just being honest about what turns them on is scary to say to their partner, right? You're not even going anywhere. Yeah. You're just having a conversation. So, and that could be an option. Like if you really want to talk about like where to start, that's like risky, but still like very safe in the spectrum would be to start having conversations about what actually turns you on. And Esther Perel has a card game now that she's selling where those prompts are on the cards. So you can be like, well, I'm just, reading the card here and answering. But then I think if, there are like a simple way to get started could be watching shows that have, open relationships or swinging in it. That's got a bit of voyeurism in it anyway, right? If you want to do something in the real world, going to a strip club together is, something kind of sexy and sexualized, but you're not going to have any pressure, to do anything. Just talking about fantasies. I really love, there's something called the Erotic Blueprint. It's an online test by Jaya, and it's 5 types of what drives your erotic energy. And you can do that as a couple, and the reports have a lot of information. So you can talk about your blueprint and your partner's blueprint and where you overlap and where you may be different, which can open up a great conversation about some aspects of your sexual desires that are not being fulfilled. But if you really want to get going into really trying open relationships, I think the app where most people are right now is Feeld, FEELD. And there's, a lot of, you can configure to what you're looking for. You can create a couples account. So you're linked in there together and you can kind of search together. But there's some great books like Sex at Dawn, Mating in Captivity. The Ethical Slut is also kind of a Bible in the community. A term that, if you're searching on the internet, the term you might look for is called ethical non-monogamy, or ENM. And there are podcasts, there are groups you can join. So there's a lot of resources when you start going down the rabbit hole.
Wow. Suzi, this is awesome. This is not what I had in mind when I started a podcast called the Examine Life Podcast, yet basically captures so much of that. And so I really, and just to be at the openness, and I still am like, this is such a risky conversation that she's having. So I still that just shows my own conditioning, right? On this topic. But
maybe in the future we need to co-create another curriculum that's all around sex and relationships, and the Examine Life sex and relationships. And there's a lot of great coaches and instructors that I've met over the years who would be great speakers for something like that.
Amazing.
Well, thank you for creating the space to have the conversation and helping get it out there a little bit.
Thank you, Suzi. You're the best.
Yeah, ditto.